Like, oh, I know y'all see we about to win the national championship this year, but you know, that ain't about nothing right now, you feel me? But put that in the back of your mind. Georgia, we on our way. Mm, it is what it is. I gotta deal with it. But, you know, today we back with Christopher Columbus's boss ancestry and his basque crew and these old world sailors who knew about America long before, you know, Christopher Columbus. You know, your boy Totolini, you know what I'm saying, and his maps and the Portuguese and how they got this map from the Vatican and Pizarro and all of them. You know, we've been over this. We've been over this. All right. So, you know, as you can see, the same maps, you know, that the Genghis Khan and all of them Marco Polo was using are these maps. Uh, some people say even your boy, what's his name? Abu Kara, you know what I'm saying? They say he also had went to Egypt to retrieve these same maps that were given to the Vatican at that time. So we're gonna see what's up. All right. It says Columbus was a man who liked frills. This is no archaeological evidence of the Islam in America before Columbus' arrival, though a 10th century historian tells us the story of a Muslim navigator who returned from a western unknown territory with marvelous treasures, complete with a map showing a vague outline of the western coast shrouded in fog. The tale does not mean Muslim merchants beat Columbus. All right, you know what I'm saying? Let's just see. Of course, the Muslim navigator. How could I forget? Your boy Hushin was a goddamn Muslim. You know what I'm saying? And a Buddhist. Matter of fact, dude had to be like practicing like three religions. They saying, because I've heard him say that he was a Buddhist monk. With I think that's just because of the region he left. You know, Buddhism and Islam were sharing the same countries, simultaneous in most places. If you notice. But you know, let's keep it moving. All right. The West Coast shrouded in fog. The tales do not mean Muslim merchants beat Columbus. As the Washington Post, Ishan Taror points out, Erdogan is probably alluding to the work of the controversial semi academic Youssef Morey, who takes mosque literally and suggests that indigenous words have Arabic etymologies. Vikings usually called the first Old Worlders to reach the western shores Eric the Red and his father, who respectively exiled from Iceland and Norway for murders, reached Greenland in 1985. Eric took about 500 people with farm animals and supplies to settle Greenland, and his son Leif Erikson returned a few years later when the region had some 1,000 settlers. Vikings told a saga of Leif's westward adventures, but it wasn't until 1960 that archaeologists found evidence. Halls, peat houses, ironwork, and 11th century Vikings at Lanas Ox Meadows in Baffin Islands in Canada. But the Vikings may have not been alone. Among Europeans sailing west, archaeologists have found evidence of basque in pursuit of whales and cod might have reached the territory the Vikings called Vinland. Journalist Mark Kurlansky, in his book Cod, points out that the Basques seemed to know all the secret cod spots and knew how to salt and preserve food, meaning they could travel huge distances. In 1535, when Jacques Cartier discovered the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, he found 1,000 Basque fishing boats already in the water, flush with cod. Bristolians couldn't keep their mitts off the fish either. Kurlansky detailed how in 1480 Bristol fishermen saw the basque bring cod already dried, which the cod not have done on which cod could not have done on the ship, and English officials and merchants organized an expedition west to look for an island called Hy Brasil, back again, which they thought could serve as a bountiful fishing base. The men never said what they found, if anything, but they did start bringing back fish in the 1950s. A letter dated 1497 turned up in the Spanish National Archives about the English merchants to the Lord Grand Admiral of Spain, presumably Columbus. The Cape before mentioned land is one found and discovered in other times by the people of Bristol and thought to have been an island. As the Lordship already knows, Kurlansky writes that purely commercial interests, neither Basques nor Bristolians, felt like planting flags and may well have landed in North America before Columbus. Russians also sometimes claim to have reached Americas first, taking undue credit for migrations that occurred during the last ice age over 10,000 years ago when Siberians and Asian people crossed the Bering Strait. You see, I gotta throw that Bering Strait shit in there because now with the Russians saying that they beat Americans over to the west coast of America, it shows you a pre-colonial miscegenation and old bloodlines and DNA showing up in America that shouldn't be there. And that always throws off your story because now you can't put DNA. They try to put timestamps on it, but it's hard to put timestamps on DNA and say, oh, this is the ancient DNA. This is the new DNA. This is all up for interpretation. Me finding it in an old place is calling it old. But if I find an old marker in a modern person, also I almost need something in the ground to compare it to, which is hard because DNA has a 500-year half-life. So most of this shit is already damn near, not, you can barely do anything with it. And now, they always say, oh, well, we isolated a small amount of DNA and we tested this and it came back with this, and that. But you get false reads and false negatives. Go back, look at the other research about the PCAs and the STRs not being right, that they just been using it as science eugenics. Sorry about your DNA test. I'm sorry it's not 100% accurate. So, throw it about 30, 40, take it with a grain of salt. Do what you must. Just know that, they don't know what DNA really is. All right. Was long accepted until bits of evidence complicated it. Sites in Florida, Texas, and Chile poke holes in accepted timeline, putting people all around the Americas during the years when tribes were thought to be crossing the straits. Groups may have sailed from Polynesia to South America. Theories arguably supported by sweet potato DNA, or even southern France and northern Spain to modern U.S. East Coast. It gets very continuous and could go back as far as 20,000 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Plenty of less empirically minded folks who wanted to retroactively claim history today. A few French scholars suggest that pre-Columbian civilizations had foundations built by Africans, backing up the theory with toxicology of Egyptian mummies by saying Olmec heads kind of look like Africans, or suggesting that Aztecs worship black deities such as Quetzalcoatl, also portrayed as gigantic feathery snake. One best-selling writer describes by actual historian as Geoff Wade implies Chinese eunuch Admiral Zheng He visited America. Elizabethan took up a folk story about the Welsh Prince to justify colonial claims of 19th century Mormons. Founders said indigenous Americans descend from Israelites who arrived in 600 BC, including ones cursed with skin of blackness. Like I said, it's long. So we in the Tuscaloosa and Columbus. It's a great book. You can go pick it up over there at archives.org. I think I'll drop the link down there in the description. I have been doing that. If there's ever any books, like I said, that y'all see in here or information that y'all are looking for yourself and you need a link or something, just holler at your boy, man. I can I can get that for you. It's never a problem, man. This shit ain't here for me to hold on to and make it seem like I know it all, because I don't. You know what I mean? But I do have a good grasp on what this shit is. So, what it ain't. But, I need, also, if you have any suggestions or anything, just don't come with all that animosity in your chest. But, you gladly can comment underneath the videos. We can have discussions, you know what I mean? If you ever want to go live and have discussions, let me know. You know what I'm saying? We can always tap in. You don't have to be a fucking whatever they're trying to make this out to be. It doesn't have to be an American Indian thing. You could be anybody as long as you want to talk, because I'm bad, y'all. These headphones be tripping. Good headphones, but they be just cutting off for no reason. But also, like I said, but yeah, if you wanna holler at me, just let me know, man. We can get into something. But this was advice attributed to Tuscaloosa. This is chapter 1. And routes to the Indies by the West. You know what I'm saying? It's right here. Like people say, when they first download it, sometimes you read stuff, you don't really know what to do with it. You don't really have a full grasp on the knowledge, so everything seems like a lie. I know everything seemed like it wasn't real to me for a little while. But there's always a background story that they ain't telling you. You know what I mean? Alright, let's get into it. It says, Canon Martin's request, long before 1474, it says Humboldt Tuscaloosa has suggested to the Portuguese government the routes Columbus followed, the assertion which is found under various forms of the works of responsible authors rests solely on the letters of Florentine astronomer Tuscaloosa, is supported to have written to Humboldt. That's a whole bunch of sources right there if you want to get into those. Many years before Columbus discovered America by Columbus, the Portuguese were employed seeking the westward passage to reach the Indies. I already know about the Indies. They was already trying to get to the bag, as you see. You know what I'm saying? Give me 1 sec. I'm twisting up. Just give me 1 sec. It says, Counselor of King Alfonso, recommending to the prince the route of the Indies by the west, copy of which the letters was found among the papers of Columbus. If the assertion be well founded, if King Alfonso really formed the design of reaching the Indies by crossing the Atlantic. So once again, if Columbus knew they were called the Indies, knew to call them the Indians, you know what I'm saying? The story that he was trying to reach China is a fucking lie. This shit doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason whenever China's right there. It's a shorter route to go to China, straight through the Silk Road and the Moors. Like, you have a better chance than jumping on a boat and traveling thousands and thousands of miles the opposite direction to hit the opposite coast of one of the most powerful nations of the world. Like, they wouldn't fuck you up for trying it. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. The Indies, whose development led to the discovery of the New World, and one which too much attention cannot be paid. In the term of the famous letter of Lisbon, Canon Fernand Martins, who entertained friendly relations with Tuscaloosa and who filled an important personal post near King Alfonso V. and been commissioned by the monarch to obtain some information from his friends as to the possibility of reaching the East Indies by sailing to the west. We learn by the letter that this matter had already led to an exchange of views between Martin and Tuscalini, and the letters had previously represented the western routes to be much shorter than the ones to the southeast. But it would appear that the king who desired to attempt the enterprise was not sufficiently documented, and Martin's returning to the questioning requested further information from his correspondent, who hastened to give it. Tuscal- Tuscalini's reply. The learned astronomer began by observing that though he well known the practicability of the route he suggested is demonstrated by the, the sphericity of the Earth, the sphericity of the Earth, the circleness of the Earth. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna get that out, but I know what it means. You know what I'm saying? The Ohio when he won't let me say it. I can't do it. He will make matters clear. More frequently written Martin. Yeah, Martinez, of which the Spanish from the name Martins in the Portuguese form. By means of the map of which he has marked the coast of Portugal and his islands, in which one sails directly west to the point of arrival, as also the route to follow, the distances to be covered, as a place where the ships may put in. The comments wherewith Tuscalini's accompanies the map are short, not very explicit, but calculated and excite curiosity. He dwells upon the wealth of the countries in the east to which the roads he indicates should lead. He calls attention to the great commercial activity of which the towns of the Asiatic coast are the center, as also large numbers of ships and sailors, and the Marco Polo of Don Pedro. Although Marco Polo is not mentioned in the letters, it is easy to see all or nearly all that said there in the Eastern Asia comes from the traveler, whose accounts, although not yet published, circulated from hand to hand and greatly occupied the minds and interests in distant countries. The remarkable account, which during the 15th century was in every mouth and which had powerful influence on the geographical movement of the period, was, it alleged, well known that Alfonso V in 1420, Alfonso's uncle Don Pedro, Duke of Coimbra, is said to have brought back from voyages a copy received from a munificence of the Venetian Republic. So that's the Vatican, I think. The Venetian Republic would have to be the Vatican. By then, the Vatican was in control of Egypt and everything else, North Africa, Bali, and all the great Alexandria. They had all the libraries by then. I can't think of a library that they had to take recently. Copy received. Okay, boom. Which is greatly treasured as bearing on this. Let us mention that Martin Oliveira, we're going to get into him in a second, or Olivita, who is by no means alone, starting in fact quotes and passages from official documents, apparently on Alfonso V, wherein the story of the present to his uncle is confirmed. Nevertheless, we have not been able to find the origins of this document, the source of which is not clearly indicated. Valentinian Fernando, who published a Portuguese translation of Marco Polo at Lisbon in 1502, says in his preface, addresses the king of Manoel, that he had heard, and related Don Pedro brought back from Venice a manuscript of Marco Polo believed to be the Torre di Tombo. If that is to be true, he adds, Your Majesty must know better than anyone. The last phrase shows that Ferdinand had never seen Don Pedro's manuscript, even the existence of which seemed to him doubtful. Contrary, therefore, to quantities of merchandise gathered in their harbors, he mentioned the praise of the great Khan, the King of Kings, who ruled over all regions and who resided chiefly in the province of Cathay. So we know about Cathay.
Archive.org. Mew. Preface to third edition. Little did I think, some 30 years ago, when I received a copy of the first edition of this grand work, that I should be one day entrusted with the difficult but glorious task of supervising the third edition when the first edition of the book of Esser Marco Polo reached far Cathay. It created quite a stir in the small circle of the learned foreigners, who then resided there, and became a starting point for many researches, of which the results have been made use of partly in the second edition and partly in the present. The Archimandrite Palladius and Dr. E. Bretschneider at Peking, Alex. WYLI, at Shanghai, friends of mine who have, alas, passed away, with the exception of the Right Reverend Bishop G. E. Mole, of Hangzhou, the only survivor of this little group of hard-working scholars, were the first to explore the Chinese sources of information which were to yield a rich harvest into their hands. When I returned home from China in 1876, I was introduced to Colonel Our YULR at the India office by our common friend, Dr. Reinholi Rost, and from that time we met frequently and kept up a correspondence which terminated only with the Marco Polo. 499. Catholic Crusader and the Catholic Sovereign. The experiences of the Polos, therefore, are not merely a delightful or romantic tale. They afford a basis and starting point for all the subsequent expansion of Latin Europe. The new knowledge is bound up with material gain. The Venetian pioneers effectively opened to Christian enterprise, or at least to Christian intelligence and study, those markets which every ambitious and wealth-loving people had long considered to be the prizes of the world. From this time, Frankish civilization directs itself, first by overland, then by oversea, routes toward the Cathay, those Indies, where it looks to find the riches, if not the empire, which it can last rewarded its unconquerable energy and persistence. In the Columbian or Columbus Library at Seville, there is a printed copy of the Polo record, the Liber Diversorum or Livre de Diversités of Messer Marco Milioni, which belonged to Colon, and in this there are manuscript notes, by Christopher himself, on 76 of the 150 pages, showing how well he knew and how much he valued the book, which perhaps more than tithes, a Cuban monarch was now at war. The Can's great ships, he understood, came to Cuba, 10 days' journey from the Chinese mainland. The cotton of the West Indies would be sure of a good market in his cities. His Majesty was perhaps in the grand city of Cathay. It is certain, he writes, while still off the Cuban coast, that I am in front of Zaitu and Guince of Amoy Harbor and Hangzhou. And again, in the Caribe or Canaba, which was described to him as the main land behind Hispaniola, in our land gauge, the north coast of South America, Columbus believes he has at last located the name and kingdom of the The Book of Marco Polo is the fullest and most remarkable record of the great age of medieval overland intercourse, of the earlier Asiatic expansion of Catholic Europe, which began with Carpini and with Rubruck. But the Polo Journées do not exhaust this movement, mainly commercial and missionary, of Western Christendom upon the Mongol Western Christendom world. Under the Tartar emperors there is little hindrance from religious bigotry or mercantile exclusiveness in the X.
A conception of Asia long after Cathay has become an American colony. It is difficult to read Marco Polo as you read a historical fact. One reads his romances as it would read an instance of Eve of St. Mark's, or Well at the World's End, the underworld. The East of which he writes is the East of romance, not the East of Anglo-Indian with the Samala. His missions to Tibet, richer telegrams. In the East of romance, there grows a tree of the sun, a dry tree by which Marco Polo passed, a sort of landmark or milestone, the mulberry tree. At the end of the great desert, the apples of the sun and the moon grow up upon that tree. Darius and Alexander fought in the shade. Those are the significant facts about the tree according to Marco Polo. We moderns who care little for the tree, soon as we can murmur its Latin name, have lost wonder in losing faith. The Middle Age, even as the own age was full of talk of earthly paradise. It may be that we have progressed in learning to talk of its social possibilities instead of as a geographical fact. We like to think that the old Venetians went eastward on their famous journey, half believing that they would arrive there, just as Columbus 2 centuries later half expected to sight land where golden blossoms burn upon the trees forever. They did not find the earthly paradise. We'll get the rest of that later.
In this context, it is also worth noting a report that Columbus had information about strange people from the West who had reached Ireland prior to 1492, doubtless via the Gulf Stream. Marion tells us that Bartholomew or Christopher Columbus had made marginal notes in their copy of Pius II's Historia, 1477, to the effect that some men have come from Cathay by heading east. We have seen more than one remarkable thing, especially in Galway, in Ireland, 2 people tied to 2 wrecks, a man and a woman, a superb creature. Marion also believes that the first documented case of a single navigator crossing the Atlantic consists in the record of a Native American who reached the Iberian Peninsula long before Columbus's day. In this context, it is also
It says, this personage played a considerable role in the imagination of the earlier discoverers. In the very first lines of his logbook, Columbus recalls in the same expression found in Tusculini's letter, and he had informed the Catholic kings about the Great Khan and the King of Kings, and about the embassies and the potentate, and he said to the Pope Dario, preamble. It is generally believed that Ferdinand and Isabella allowed themselves to be persuaded by what he told them of this subject, and that they addressed a letter to the Great Khan, which Columbus understood to deliver, and he actually endeavored to get it to the destination when he reached Cuba, which he took to be a portion of the Kingdom of Cathay, and that was on December 21st and 30th, October 1492, see notes 23. Cathay, this name, which appears here for the first time, holds a great place in geographical history. From the 14th and 16th century, it appears to have been introduced into Europe by John Plancarpin and the Barbertine monk Ruberquist and Rusabrock in 1253, who attributed to ancient China, in which it was the Mongol name, according to Yule. Kayahite was the application of the Tartar people who conquered the northeast of China in the 11th century and founded the empire that was long prosperous. The Mongol invasion of the 13th century put an end to the empire, but the Kayahite was corrupted into Cathay, stuck to China. With the administration of the city of Zaytun, which every year 100 vessels are laden with pepper, not to mention other cargoes. The most important part of the letter posts a scriptum which indicates the distance traversed going from Portugal to the land of spices, from Lisbon to in Asia. Whole China was commonly known by the name in Europe. An expression was sometimes taken in sense and at others in designated a kingdom or province in northern China. Marco Polo used it in the latter sense and calls the capital of the province Columbia or Kulabulu or Khanabak, which signifies the town or abode of the Khan. It is now Peking. The expression was always somewhat vague, but in the 15th and 16th century there was a tendency to push further to the northeast, the region to which it properly belonged. It is thought Asia extended in the direction far beyond the actual limits of northern China, or Cathay, spread over the desert steppes. Sakri people by the I can't even say that, Tuscalis, or the Kamachadales, but were pictured as covered with flourishing cities. It is from the geographical idea that sprung the many efforts to discover the road to Cathay by the northwest and the northeast. The name Cathay did not survive the Mongolian power of the Far East. It finally disappeared, but Europe, the use of the name was long maintained. Zayatan or Zaytan or Yule Marco Polo. Now Chang Chao, the 1st November 1492, Columbus, abreast of Cuba, wrote, I have in front of me Zato and Guinnessay. Dario, 1st November 1492, the great commerce of Eastern Asia, says Humboldt, was in the 13th century divided between Quinsay and Zayton. A superb city of Quinsay, the province of Menjai. There are going directly west 26 spaces marked on the map, each space comprising 250 miles or 6,500 miles in all, making about 1/3 the circumference of the globe. But as from the Isles of Antilia, the form of Isles of Sapangu, there are 10 spaces, the unknown portion of, I'd be going to say, the ancient capital of southern China. Read all that. The ocean to be crossed is not great, therefore, by bringing up at Antilia, the Atlantic coast is easily reached. Thus, on these indications, the maritime spaces separating the two extremities of the world is far less in extent than the terrestrial spaces. In other words, by taking the ocean way westward to the Indies, the journey is much shorter than by the overland route eastward by the sea route to the southeast. For the far road extends 26 spaces, a third of the sphere, while others comprise of 52 spaces. Importance of correspondence, if authentic. One can see the consequences that follow the existence of the correspondence between King Alfonso and Tuscany from the year 1474, or rather before the date of Tuscany, only returns to the question Martin's correspondence from recommended the Portuguese king to cross the Atlantic direct westward in order to reach the Indies. If he had sent him a map on which was traced the road to be followed, and if he accompanied this map with explanations point out the route of being shorter than the one southeast, known as the Ghanaian route, then it is clear it is celebrated Florentine astronomer that showed the way to Columbus, and those were in the right who said that to him was due the honor of having taken initiative in the discovery of America, although the authenticity of the correspondence has never been called in question. It is far from being incontrovertible history. It is full of events which may be said as mainly individuals that have been favored by good luck. Long usage habituates us to them, passing from the mouth to mouth, from book to book. They end up by acquiring the right of historical citation, and we accept them without even imagining that they might be called in question. A fact which a common consent, the rank in all books of history were submitted to searching analysts, and would be surprising to find numbers of accuracies was anything but well established. Others, on the contrary, without being in the least more doubtful, find it hard to win believing. Criticism minutely deserts them in pitiless lay open in defects which may and which often should place them under suspicion. The first voyages of Vespucci, to mention only single instances and cases. In the second category, the letter of Tuscany and Freeman Martin, an example of the form of the documents, had been more read and more studied, often translated and expounded than the famous letters. None has ever been more easily accepted. Tuscany's island, Antilia. In the maritime expanse of 130 degrees, the map indicates some islands. This is evident from the former assertion by Las Casas to the effects of and form the phrase in the letter wherein the author himself speaks of merchants living in the island, and say he has marked on the map the harbors where the navigators may bring to, and should bad weather or circumstances require it. but he only named two of the islands, Antilia and Sapangu. The situations of Antilia is not indicated, but the author of the letter writes the imaginary correspondence, the imagery correspondence that it is known to him a famous island which occupied such a considerable a place of Atlantic geography of the Middle Ages is in fact marked a certain number of Fortellini in the 15th century, after the best known those of Benico or Pareto and of Beniscasa. It is situated at the distance from Lisbon that may be reckoned from 30 to 35 degrees of Bohemia's globe. It is placed further to the west, being located some 50 degrees from Lisbon. Pascal, in the reassertion of Tuscolini's maps, placed Antilia about the 45th degree from Lisbon. As we take it for granted that Columbus' geography is the same as that of the writer of the letter to Martin. And as we know, but Las Casas and Columbus had noted that the old sea chart placed Antilia about 200 leagues west of the Azores, which ought rather to be guided by the information which it does not allow us to set back the island so far to the westward as Pascal, Crescimer, and even Wagner. One may reckon on average 10 degrees or 200 leagues from the Azores to the Canaries and 8 degrees to 160. The different copies we possess of the globe do not all give the same position to Antilia. On the reproduction in Jomard's Atlas, it is 60 degrees west of the meridian of Lisbon and sinks away to the south, being placed close to the equator, where it occupies the position of San Brandan, which disappears altogether on the globe itself, according to Wagner, at 10 spaces and 50 degrees from Lisbon, and also 10 spaces from the eastern coast of Sapangu. Gelani similarly locates Pascal. Kessimer puts 5 degrees towards the island. Rouge reckons 10 spaces between Antilia and the Iberian coast, but with him the value of each space was 4 degrees as regarded in parallels. All reproductions except Jomard's place it pretty nearly the same latitude, viz. About the height of upper portions of Sapangu. This is to say close to the Tropic of Cancer. It is so situated on the original globe. These from the Canaries. The meridian of Lisbon, the 18 degrees or 360 leagues in all. If Antilia were 10 degrees or 200 leagues from the Azores, we should have placed it about on the 28th meridian from Lisbon, but Columbus says it about more than 200 leagues, more expression, which can only mean at not much more than 200 leagues. We are entitled to believe that after the information had gathered, Antilia was to be formed at some degrees beyond the 28th meridian of Lisbon, which accords with what we learned from the Fortellini. Seeking now these data where Antilia ought to be placed on the map of the author of the letter to Martin, we shall find it should be in the 8th or the 9th or the 26th spaces, because like Columbus, he only reckoned 15 leagues. The degrees of 75 leagues of each space of 5 degrees in the 8th island, where 200 leagues from the Azores, that they say 400 leagues from the Canary, and at 560 from Lisbon, a distance which fixes us as the 38th meridian on the map in the ninth space, if we're more than 200 leagues from the Azores. Sapangu says authors of the letters of Martin in 10 spaces of 50 degrees beyond Antilia, the position of Antilia being, as we have just seen, are approximately ascertained, and follow this. Sapangu also cannot be located with certainty. We refer the course to the situation to the author of the letters Columbus assigns to that island and not to its actual position, which is known to us. We are aware that it was Japan. If we put Antilia in the 8th space under the 38th meridian of the author of the map of 560 leagues of Lisbon, Sapangu must be located just beyond the 18th and the 26th spaces. It should consequently, we found 750 leagues westwards of Antilia. This found 750 leagues. We add 200 leagues separating this island from the Azores. The Azores leagues between the group of the Canaries is finally 160 leagues lying between the Canaries and Lisbon. We shall find Sapangu, according to the author. The letter to Martin was at 950 leagues from the Azores, 1,150 leagues from the Canaries, 1,310 leagues from the Lisbon. That is to say, it was sought after 87th meridian west of Lisbon. In the chart scale, 15 leagues to the degree which accompany the letters corresponding to 65th degree on a map scale, 20 leagues to the degree which, neglecting the minutes and seconds, gives us 75th degree west of Greenwich. Let us now see Columbus thought to find Sapangu. According to his son, he had told his crew they must not expect to find it before making 750 leagues, 3,000 miles westward of the Canaries. This was 400 leagues less than he should have, according to the information given the letter to Martin. But Columbus had an interest in finding from his crew a great distance they had to go, and who in fact did not reveal to them a real distance, and sail each day may well sail 750 instead of 1,150 leagues. Instead, we find that neither on the 2nd of October, a day when his diary his diary shows that he sailed 746 leagues, nor 3rd or 4th or 5th or 3 days, which they made additional 167 leagues, thus far outstepping 750 leagues of which he had spoken. Does he say one word about Sapangu? It is only on the 6th of October, at the close of which they had covered 953 leagues, that his diary mentions Sapangu for the first time. It is just a mere reference, but suffice to show Columbus and also Pinzons were thinking of that island. On 13th of October, the morrow of the discovery of Guanahani, after covering 1,123 leagues, or 4,492 miles, since leaving the Canaries, Columbus thinks it is close to Sapangu. It devotes his time to searching for it. At the time, according to the information given by the letter of Martin's, he was in fact only 27 leagues from the famous island. The following days were spent in sailing from island to island in hope of discovering one in which they searched. Only the 21st, during the short stay on Sarmiento Island, probably Crooked Island, the Indians told Columbus of a large island called Cuba, and gave him such descriptions of it that he fell sure this time that he was right. Cuba must be Sapangu. He will go there at once. On the 23rd, he repeats that Cuba is Sapangu. On the 24th, he sets sail for it and says that the globe and the world maps have been consulted show this island to be in this position. We do not know what globe or world maps Columbus is making allusion. If there existed globes and maps which represented Sapangu at 11 and 1200 leagues west of the Canaries, they have disappeared after all the matters of great importance. But his importance is Columbus sought for Sapangu in very longitude, where according to these informations flourished by the letters of Martin, it was to be found in the Viz after having sailed 1,123 leagues westward of the Canaries. Columbus did not persist in belief with the Cuba it was Sapangu, but continued to search for it among the Antilles and finally concluded that it must be Hispaniola.
From the city of Ulisipon in a direct direction to the west are 26 spaces marked on paper, each of which is 250 miles to the most noble and largest city of Quince. For it is 100 miles round, and has 10 bridges, and its name sounds Città del Cielo, the city of heaven, and there are many things to marvel about it. They are told of the multitude of artifices and of the revenue. This space is nearly a third part of the entire sphere. Which city is in the province of Manji, that is, the neighboring province of Catay, in which the royal residence of the land is? But from the island of Antilia, known to you, to the most noble island of Sapamu, there are 10 spaces. For that island is very fertile in gold, pearls, and gems, and temples and royal houses are covered with solid gold. Therefore, by unknown routes, we should not cross large spaces of the sea. Many things might be more openly declared. From the city in a direct line there are 26 spaces marked on the charter, each of which is 250 miles up to the most noble, and the largest city is Quince, for it is 100 miles in circuit and has 10 bridges, and its name sounds like Città del Cielo, city of heaven, and there are many wonders about it. They are told of the multitude of artifici 32 and of the revenue. This space is about a third faster than expected. Which city is in the province of Manji, that is, adjacent to the province of Catay, in which the royal residence is on earth? But from the island of the Antilles, known to you, to the most noble island of Sapamu, there are 10 spaces, for that island is the most fertile of gold. They cover the temples and royal houses with pearls and gems, and with solid gold, in such a way that they do not have to cross the great expanses of the sea by unknown routes. Perhaps.
Modern scientific studies show the Basque and the Spartans, Trojans, and the Tarsians to be a branch of the Judah. King Arthur was the prince of the Silures and son of Uther, named Pendragon. Paramount over many kings of the Silures were identical with the dark, long-headed Basque people found in Pyrenees, which were Iberians.
The next question we have to ask is, who were these people? Thanks to the labors of Dr. Thurnham and Professors Huxley and Busk in this country, Dr. Broca in Paris, and Professor Virchow in Berlin, we are able to answer without much hesitation. According to the results of their labors, this race of small and long-headed people is identical with the small, dark, long-headed section of the Basque-speaking people at present found in the Western Pyrenees. These small dark Basques, or Gascons as we may term them, are to be looked upon as a fragment of the old Spanish population which is known in the pages of history by the name of the Iberian, and to which Spain owes its name of the Iberian Peninsula. If this identification be true, we are led to this very interesting conclusion, that in ancient times the dark people now living in the Western Pyrenees extended over the whole of France, as far as the Rhine, and over the whole of this country in Ireland. If this conclusion be true, surely we ought to meet with fragments of this population amongst the people living in these various countries. In proof of this we must appeal to the written record. When the history of Spain began, there were two distinct peoples, the Celts, living in the south, on the Mediterranean side, and these small dark Iberians, living on the Atlantic side, and between them there was a mixed race named Celt-Iberian. In the case of France, the history of Spain repeats itself. On the western side of France, at the beginning of history, the Iberian population extended as far north as the river Loire. When we examine the evidence in this country, we find precisely the same class of proof. At the time when Wales was conquered by the Romans, we find that Tacitus describes a certain small, dark Iberian population, which I have named. At the present time you have merely to go into the marketplaces of Saint Asaph, composed of Basque and two different languages of the Indians, that was established when the Basques first started fishing for cod and whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they traded with them, the Indians of his area, especially with the nation called Eskimos. Mike Max, 1989, 259. It has also been called the Micmac Basque pigeon, as well as Sauricois. Smith, 1994, a pigeon Basque Montagne, called Montagne pigeon Basque in Smith, 1994, has also been mentioned, and may be associated with it. If it is accurately identified, this Basque Algonquian pigeon is perhaps the oldest pigeon attested in North America, thought to have been spoken ca. 1540 to 1250 p.m. 0. Among the other Basques on this second voyage are the following, several of whom will play prominent roles in the development of the New World: Francisco de Garay, Sebastián de Olano, Juan Ortiz de Matienzo, Hernando de Guevara, Luis de Arteaga, Bartolomé Salcedo, Miguel de Munchares, Luis de Lazarzu, Juan de Azua, Pedro de Arana, Gabriel Beltrán, Hernando de Berrio, Juan Esquera, Juan de Oñate, Diego de Arciaga, Pedro Vizcaíno, Juan de Berruti, Juan de Zamudio, Adrián de Muxica, Pedro Gámez, Domingo de Escobar, and Juan Ibarra de Ibáñez. As Columbus returns to the island of Hispaniola, his ships are loaded with all types of foodstuffs, seeds, plants, and domestic animals, including horses, cattle, sheep, hogs, and chickens, to maintain the colonies he expects to establish. Other organisms also make the voyage. They are in the soil, on the plants, and inside and on the animals. These are all types of parasites, insects. The inhabitants of our islands previous to the Roman invasion are generally described as Celts. But they must have been largely a mixed race, and the people with whom they mingled must have modified to some and perhaps to a large extent their physique, their customs, and their language. Speculation has run somewhat wild over the question of the composition of the early Britons. But out of the clash of rival theories there emerges one, and one only, which may be considered as scientifically established. We have certain proof of two distinct human stocks in the British Islands at the time of the Roman conquest, and so great an authority as Professor Huxley has given his opinion that there is no evidence of any others. The The earliest of these two races would seem to have inhabited our islands from the most ancient times, and may, for our purpose, be described as aboriginal. It was the people that built up long barrows, and which is variously called by ethnologists the Iberian, Mediterranean, Berber, Basque, Silurian, or Euskarian race. In physique it was short, swarthy, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and long-skulled. Its language belonged to the class called Hamitic, the surviving types of which are found among the Gallas, Abyssinians, Berbers, and other North African tribes, and it seems to have come.
It's another Basque colony, located by as well as an American continent in the year 1375 exactly, on the island Newfoundland, more than 100 years before the arrival in the New World of the Genesese admiral. But they were not conquerors, but fishermen with a reputation as corsairs or pirates. They did not kill Indians with whales for the sustenance in their factories and well oil and the lighting of European houses and cities.
And postulated even by the most daring believers in such a thesis? Certainly the trail is obvious as far back as the 17th century. Melungeons are sometimes referred to as Black Dutch, a usage common especially among mixed-blood Cherokee people. This term originally referred to Hollanders of dark appearance during the Spanish occupation of the Netherlands in the 1600s. After Dutch independence, colonial Virginia and Carolina records called the same people Portuguese. A connection between the two lay in Judaizing, returning to Judaism after forced or feigned conversion to Christianity, Sephardic merchants, or Marranos, Spanish-Portuguese bankers and merchants, who settled in the Dutch Republic following its separation from Spain. These called themselves, ambiguously, Gente del Linaje, or Homens da Nação, and in English, Hebrews of the Portuguese nation. Following the introduction of the Spanish Inquisition in the 1490s, and especially as it was stepped up by Catholic authorities after 1580, they streamed into Britain, especially Scotland, and thence to America. One theory about the meaning of the word Melungeon is that it is an Arabic word meaning cursed souls. This is an apt description for a people who seem to be dogged by persecution. Another explanation of the epithet lays in the use of melangina, an archaic word for eggplant, a term applied in inquisitorial Spain, Portugal, and Italy to crypto-Jews, who favored eggplant stew over pork. Comparable racial terms are melanzana in Italian, mulenium in Sicilian, and molanjan in English. It may be nothing more than a nonce word coined on the basis of French melange, as some maintain, but the eggplant allusions permeate the hidden meaning in Cervantes' Don Quixote with its crypto-Jewish, crypto-Muslim narrator Cide Hamete Benengili, Mr. Eggplant. The surname Benenhaley persists among South Carolina's mixed-blood Turks, whose DNA matches show Portuguese, Moroccan, Brazilian, Berber, Egyptian, and Arab, as well as Native American and Sub-Saharan African origins. As late as the 1950s, health officials in several southern states, notably Walter Plecker in Virginia, maintained lists of Melungeon surnames that belonged, they said, to degenerate, mongrel breeds, the products of miscegenation. Almost every one of the surnames mentioned in this book appears on these lists. My mother did not have a birth certificate. It was destroyed, presumably because of what it said or implied about her race. In my reading of the archaeological record, the story of Jews and related peoples among the Indians goes back many centuries before any Sephardic Jew set foot on these shores. Perhaps the most astonishing piece of evidence for ancient contact between the Old and New World is the Bat Creek stone, see Chapter 9, an inscription from an Indian tomb in Tennessee that has been interpreted as a Hebrew record of the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt of 8. Notice of the Caribs in Central America, communicated by Colonel Don Juan Galindo, FRGS dated Government House, Trujillo, 1833. Though found in the Caribbean Isles by the Europeans on their first arrival in America, the Carib race is identical in outward appearance with the African Negro. Conquered and dispersed, the only remnant of the Caribs occupied a portion of the island of St. Vincent, whence their whole population was brought by the British authorities in 1796 and landed at Port Royal in Roatan, but a few months afterwards transported by the Spaniards to Trujillo. This port remained their parent settlement, though latterly, as their population increased, colonies of them spread round the shores of the Bay of Honduras, and particularly a town called Stan Creek, to the southward of Belize, composed of emigrants from hence, has risen into adventure. Mo Hve been fanatic exemic and door devils would not have begun, they say, with Nick had only with the Basques, these giddy adventures. Jules Michelet, on Whaling, Lemaire, 1856. Archaeological evidence places Hask whalers and cod fishermen, IHLY or not, in what is Newfoundland. Cotta before Columbus voyages. Since the Middle Ages, Bork seamen prevoed pump with its Huon whale. When the teacher waters of the Bay of Bire depleted of one to catch whales and codfish, Hoy tum the tips north towards Iceland and then southwest towards North America. These Salon intensively explore the Cabum Canadian cut in parts of Leland and start building whaling ramps, probably before the year 1500. Free 1500 C of Basque whalers inhabit at least we as whaling villages during each 5-month season along the North American count. They make the 2,000 mila Mont trip to and Foss Youp is 50 for gallons that carry
50,000 gallons of whale oil. They hunt whales in 25-foot-long rowboats called textiles. I don't know what that word is. In 1543, on the voyages of discovery, explores Jacques Esquadriere is surprised to see Basque fishing ships already anchored in Labrador Harbor. We already know about that. Says now much is known to Christopher Columbus's early life, except that he was probably born in Genoa. However, his parents' heritage is unknown. A question that has been posed is, was Columbus Basque? Supporting the theory, Spanish historian Fernando de Valle Lasurde argues that Columbus was from Nafora and at one time fought as a Basque pirate for his uncle Admiral Guillermo de Casanova. Lasurde states Casavone was a Basque pirate and was variously known as Cologne in the battles of Cape St. Vincent near Lisbon. In August 1476, Delville relates that Columbus was just 14 years old and he fought in and with his uncle's pirate fleet against Genoa under the name of Colombo Jr. In addition, in 1485, when Columbus' wife dies, he spends the rest of his life with the Beatriz Enriquez de Arana, who is introduced to him by Diego de Arana. Diego is an officer on Columbus' first voyage to the New World. Columbus and Beatriz never marry and have a illegitimate son, Fernando. Some nigga shit. Columbus flagship Santa Maria, nicknamed La Galagia, is built in Basque shipyards and is the property of the Zankian Juan Viscano Lascosa, who is also a shipmaster. Lascosa is also referred to as Lascoda La Costa or La Cosa, Lascosa de la Cosa, or Juan Viscano. Among the basques of the Santa Maria are Juan de la Quito, boatsman from Basquia, Martin de Herbia, cabin boy from Noxitua. Have you noticed this shit sound hella Mexican? These are all Mexican names now, modern Mexican names. But we gonna tie it in. This is extra long. I'm gonna get back with y'all.